So painless evaluation and audience surveys. This is what we've got planned. We've done introductions. We're starting just with a discussion of some principles of evaluation, thinking about some different methods and planning and how important objectives are. And I'd say about a third of the session is going to be about evaluation more broadly. And then the 2/3 of the session are going to be more focused in quite practically on audience surveys, how to do it, how to think of the best questions to ask, how to analyze the results, how to find the kind of meaning in your data. So quite nuts and boltsy practical things. It's a vast amount of content in 2 hours. It's worth saying that. So there'll be many things that we will inevitably have to sort of skate over the surface of. But if there are specific questions that you've got, or you do want to delve into things in more detail, please do ask so that we can make the most of our time together. But we're covering an awful lot of content. What else to say? I'm screen sharing, as I said. We're going to be doing some breakout conversations, but also as we go through, I may well on occasions just ask you all to share your experiences or top tips or challenges and answers and questions as we go through. So please do feel free to kind of contribute. I've got content, but it's also about you kind of sharing your experiences with colleagues as well. So please do that. So thank you very much for everyone who, when you booked, you gave some idea of the sorts of things you wanted from the session. So just going to share that back with you, the key themes that came up, just so you know. So there was a lot about hearing from other people, what works, what my peers are up to, kind of top tips from colleagues. A number of people said you wanted to know about more engaging and creative methods that weren't just survey forms and things like that. That in itself is an entire, could be an creative evaluation methods, could be an entire webinar. We are going to touch on that, but I would say if that's something you're particularly interested in, you know, do flag it with Tom and Fiona, because it might be something that they can follow up with, or do let me know and I can point you to lots of resources about creative approaches. There was quite a few people that talked about, I want to know what to do with the data once I've got it. And another theme that came out was small teams and limited resources, you know, what you can do when you haven't got big budgets and huge expertise. So hopefully these things will be covered as we go through. But there will be, as I said, chance for questions throughout. And then at the end, we'll do a recap. And if there's something that you really wanted from the session that hasn't been covered, you know, do take the chance to ask me and explore that. So we're going to dive straight in with our first little breakout conversation, which you've already started with your one-word introductions. But I'd just like to build on that really a bit more and have a conversation in you'll be put into just pairs, and please spend 5 minutes just having the conversation about what is the purpose of evaluation from your perspective, the purpose of evaluation. So a couple of minutes each side just to kind of share experiences, chat about how evaluation works in your organization, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll just have some brief feedback from a couple of pairs. So yes, so it's one way I often find quite useful to think about the purpose of evaluation is it often falls into either one of these two areas, or sometimes trying to do both if you're having a really great kind of rounded approach to evaluation. As Tom was saying, it can often be externally driven, about proving what happened. We got this funding to do this thing we promised to do. Did we deliver it? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we achieve kind of what we hoped we would? Kind of what were the results? What difference have we made? So that sort of reporting back what happened type of exercise. And then The other part of evaluation, which is in lots of ways, the kind of richer, more enjoyable, also sometimes more challenging, is, and so what? What difference have we made? You know, if that's what happened, why did it happen? What could we do differently? How's this going to change our practice going forward? You know, as you were saying, Faye, learning about what people's responses were to interpretation and to shows, you know, how can we use this internally to kind of reflect and learn and share going forward? So, and it's worth bearing in mind, I think, when you're planning evaluation, which of these two things are you kind of more or less focused on, because you'll be asking different questions for different types of things. Oops. So, an iceberg is useful to illustrate all kinds of things, and I've just popped one in here, really, again, to just make that point about the difference between kind of sharing what happened, but then going deeper beneath the surface and the more kind of qualitative inquiry and evaluation into how and why it happened, getting underneath the kind of reasons. You know, for example, 80% of the evaluation suggested 80% of the visitors had never been to the gallery before. Okay, that's a really interesting, fantastic statistic. The next question I would ask myself was, well, why? What did we do differently that meant we had such a huge proportion of new visitors? So ideally, if you're in your evaluation, you can think about kind of both parts of that iceberg, what happened and how and why it happened, and you can come up with the kind of methods to explore that, then the kind of richer your inquiry is going to be. So a bit of a table here, which I'm aware has got quite a lot of information on it, but I just wanted to use this just to point out the importance of starting with your aims and objectives, which with everything, you know, is a common theme across any kind of planning. Start with what you want to achieve and what the change you're hoping to bring about, because that's the real starting point for then figuring out how are we going to know that's happened? What's the best way of capturing that evidence? And what do we need to think about in the way we capture that? So in terms of doing any evaluation planning, that collaborative organization-wide conversation at the start about why are we doing this? What is the purpose of taking this show or doing this program or doing this community work, and being really clear about what the purpose and the outcomes are. And I've just put a few examples on here just to kind of illustrate how different outcomes will require different ways of capturing evidence and different ways of measuring change. For example, what have I got here? Bring the work of this previously unknown artist to a wide audience. So one way you might know that that's happened when you say wide audience might be, gosh, we reached a huge number of visitors. So yes, tick in the box. We did bring the work to, you know, we developed awareness of that artist. We reach a wide audience. You might want to think about, well, what do you mean by wide audience? So you can actually be much more specific in terms of the questions you ask and the way you ask them. The second one's about knowledge of contemporary art. So again, thinking about, well, if this is what we want to achieve, how are we going to know? What are the things we need to kind of look at to see if that's really happened? And something that can be useful if you're ever trying to measure any kind of change is to look at that idea of a baseline, and at the start of something to kind of ask a set of questions to see what people's kind of knowledge or thinking is before something happens, and then go back again at the end to see what the change has been after the program. So baselines can be really important for that. And then the final example I've got is just much more of a kind of qualitative one, which is all about a kind of program, that relationship building between the gallery and the local African Caribbean community. And again, it's just thinking about, depending on what you want to know, there will be some methods will be more or less appropriate. And for this one, it's going to be much less about sending a survey out to people and more about having kind of discussions and conversations to really understand what happened. So I often find that this kind of these headings across the top can be really useful when you're planning what to do with your evaluation. They're really good kind of questions to ask yourself so you can work out what the appropriate methods are. And we're going to delve in now into a bit more detail about what the different kind of methods are. So we were quickly looking at that table, and now I just move on to really quickly reminding you about things that I'm sure you're already very familiar with in terms of the type of evaluation evidence you can collect. Quantitative, which is all about kind of numbers, measuring how much, how many, what kind of proportions, which is a good way of looking at, well, you know, who is coming and what do they do. So it's very much about profile and behaviors, very useful for that. It's very much about questions with set answers rather than open questions. You can have open questions in surveys, which we'll come on to. And it's about getting a lot of data from a lot of people. So you can scale up your answers to really kind of be sure that it's a kind of true picture of what you're looking at. Qualitative evidence, on the other hand, is much more about what people think and feel. It's the below the iceberg part about what's going on beneath the surface, attitudes, beliefs, what people have learned, what's changed. It's much more about open-ended questions rather than kind of set questions. Can be much more of a discursive, kind of free-flowing way of getting information. Storytelling, for example, really brilliant way to get qualitative data from people. And storytelling is data as well. If anyone is ever kind of, you know, has somebody dismiss personal stories as not being valid, they absolutely are really valid data sources. Qualitative, though, is normally about hearing from fewer people because it's a resource-intensive way of getting information. You know, having one-to-one conversations or organising a discussion group is quite a kind of both skilled and potentially costly and quite laborious. So, you know, there are smaller groups that you're going to be talking to. Okay. And what they look like in practice, again, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Quantitative research is all about surveys of different types, which we're going to come on to in a lot more depth. Observation as well can be a quantitative method. You know, if you're interested in how people are moving around your gallery space, for example, observation can be a really powerful way of just looking at how long people are spending doing different things in your organization. Social media metrics, if you're interested in, you know, how live and how engaged people are kind of digitally in what you're doing, measuring kind of reach and levels of engagement. You know, it's all kind of hard quantitative data that can be useful. It really depends on what it is that you're actually trying to measure. Qualitative interviews, discussions. Vox Pops can be really nice, much shorter, snappier way of getting kind of just 2 or 3 questions to people that you might record or you might film with their permission. Things like learning diaries and people's own self-reflections as well can be really useful qualitative methods. And my bottom bullet point, as you can see, is creative methods, which I've just got as 1 bullet point, which I will send out some more information about. And I've just listed here things I've used or I've seen used, like quality, which is a really nice kind of tea party way of measuring kind of the quality of the event that people are taking part in. You can do things like tops and pants with kind of pinning up thing. You write on the top the things that was really fantastic that you liked. You write on the pants the things that weren't quite so good, and you end up with a really lovely washing line of tops and pants. So there's lots of really nice, mainly face-to-face. That's the challenge with creative methods I'm finding at the moment, that actually it's really hard to be more creative in a digital way. But I'll be following it up with some links to creative methods. And then I've just got a final little section here, of course, a very specific kind of focus. You might be very interested in finding out specific things in your evaluation, which might be about the economic impact of taking a certain show. What difference has it made to the local economy? You might be interested in well-being impacts, in which case there are lots of already really well thought out kind of questions and frameworks out there, so don't reinvent your own one. Social return on investment, again, can be a really powerful way of putting a kind of monetary value to the kind of social change you want to bring about. But essentially, the method you use is going to come back to what are the outcomes you want to measure, and therefore what's going to be the most appropriate way to get that evidence. It's back to asking yourself that series of questions. So I'm afraid that's it on evaluation broadly. We're now going to launch into a lot more kind of nuts and boltsy about doing surveys. But if you have got any more general evaluation questions, do ping them to me, put them in the chat, and I can send some stuff over to you. And it's also worth saying that I'm going to share all the slides afterwards as well. They will come out to you, so don't feel like you've got to write everything down. So, focusing in on surveys. We've decided with our evaluation, it's quantitative data we're looking for, and we've decided that surveys are going to be the method for doing that. So I just want to share some kind of principles about choosing the best questions. It starts with your objectives. You won't be surprised that I'm saying that again. The questions in your survey should be the ones that tell you the information that you need. There's something called the Rumi test, which I can't take credit for. My lovely colleagues at the Audience Agency came up with this, but it's a really good self-check. If you're designing a survey, to just ask yourself, well, is the answer to this going to be valuable and useful, or is it merely interesting? And really, you want valuable and useful. There's no time for merely interesting. I think you're all really busy people with limited resources. The people you want to hear from don't want to kind of spend their time answering questions that you're not actually going to use. So try and be really focused on really thinking about, is this question actually going to help me make a decision? Is it going to give me information that's actually useful for my proving or for my improving? If I'm just going to say, oh, that's interesting, but it's not going to get me anywhere, don't ask the question. Be as rigorous as you can in terms of trying to thin down your questions. Start with easier questions on a survey so people feel a bit more comfortable. Don't start with a question with 10 different kind of answer codes or a multiple choice matrix rating scale. You know, start with really nice, simple ones so that people feel comfortable doing your survey. As fewer questions as possible, the equivalent of 2 A4 pages, I would always try and say. And in terms of timing, you know, 5-6 minutes is probably the kind of optimum time for people to spend doing a survey. Any more than that, and you will definitely get a drop off. Group your questions together logically. So maybe think about a chronology: before you came, information sources together, about your visit, what you think now, for example. Again, so there's a kind of logical flow as people go through your survey. Try and mix up different types of questions, so they're not all drop down, or they're not all matrix questions, or they're not all yes and no questions. Again, just to kind of keep it interesting, to keep people engaged. Open questions are great because you can get that richer information. However, be wary of having too many open questions in a survey, because your analysis will be much more complex. It will take you a lot more time to analyze data in open questions than it will from closed questions. So just make sure that kind of balances, maybe a few open questions, but mainly closed questions, just for ease of analysis. And I'm sure you all do this already anyway. Things like the demographics questions that many funders will require you to ask, have those questions at the end of the survey. So again, people already feel comfortable at that point. Explain why you're asking for that sort of data, and explain what you're going to do with it. And really importantly, always give people the option to kind of prefer not to say for any of those questions. People shouldn't feel in any sense kind of obliged to answer questions in a survey that they don't want to. That's really key. So a whistle-stop tour through about ways of choosing your questions. What I'd like you to do now is we're going to split into breakout groups, and we've got a set of objectives, and each breakout group is going to have an objective, and I'd like you to spend a few minutes coming up with some survey questions and answers that are going to help you see if you found that objective. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to put the links to the objectives in the chat. Okay, hopefully. Okay, I'm going to have to do this one group at a time. So if you're in group 1, which you will be sent off into in a minute, your objective that you're going to measure in your survey will be: how successful have we been at engaging a new audience for the gallery? How successful have we been at engaging a new audience for the gallery? If you're in group 1, so have a reminder of that. If you're in group 2, how successful have we been at younger audiences, engaging younger audiences for the gallery? And we'll send these questions through to each group so you've got them. If you're in group 3, you've got a general objective, which is we need to understand who our audience is, just from scratch. Who's coming through our doors? If you're in group 4, your question is, what was visitors' experience like and how could it be improved? And if you're in group 5, it's how much was our visitors' visit motivated by the fact we had the Artist Rooms exhibition on? So how much was the visit motivated by Artist Rooms? So I can see many of you scribbling those down, thank you, but we will repeat them in your breakout group so you get them. So the idea is, think of some questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions that will help you answer those objectives. So think of the questions and the potential answers to know if you've been successful at achieving those things. Welcome back, everyone. So let's do a bit of feedback from each group to see what questions you came up with as being, what questions and answer options you came up with. So could we start with the first group, which was how successful have we been at engaging a new audience? Would somebody like to volunteer to share what you came up with?
I thought we were all going to unmute, but so
you got it down.
You can chip in.
Well, I think the first thing that we thought we need to ask ourselves is who the current audience is. Start with our baseline, and who we want to reach is the key question. Which audience is it that we are trying to reach? And then afterwards, have we been successful in reaching them? And three fairly simple questions to start with were: have you visited before? And why did you come, or how did you hear about us? And will you come back? And then if not, why not?
Okay, nice. So you're absolutely right. What do you mean by new audience? And really being really clear about what that means to start with. So have you visited before? What did you think? And will you come back?
How did you hear about us, really?
How did you hear about it and will you come back? Yeah, Yeah. So have you visited before as well? It might be worth breaking that down a bit more, because you could just have yes or no, or you could break it down a bit more to find out when was the last, if they have visited before, when was the last time they visited? Because you might find that you've got quite an interesting pattern of a small amount of very loyal visitors who come to everything, and then maybe proportions of people who haven't been for the last 5 years. So it might be interesting to just put an extra question in there to kind of delve into that in a bit more depth. Fab. Anyone from that group like to add anything to that? No? Thumbs up from Joe. Okay. Group 2, how successful have we been at engaging a younger audience with this exhibition? Can I have a volunteer from group 2?
I could.
I'll do it. We kind of we would do sort of thing.
Oh, Alice, your signal, I think your signal's a bit, we can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Alice, or is it just me? No. Alice, I think your signal's a bit dodgy. Do you want to just go onto audio? No. Alice is completely frozen. Would another colleague from group 2 like to chip in, and hopefully Alice will come back in a minute?
I could do it if you like.
Thanks.
Well, we kind of thought, obviously, we need to know the age of the person visiting, so we actually know that they are a young person. And then we thought we'd like to know how they found out about the exhibition. So maybe a section on, was it social media, was it poster, was it word of mouth, was it website? You could have a list of things that you could choose from, maybe. And then also we thought it would be interesting to know who they came with. So whether they came with family members, whether they came alone, whether they came with a group of friends, because it in a way that kind of lets you know if they've come under their own steam, or if they've come with a family member, then maybe they've been brought as part of a family group, so not necessarily something that they would have chosen to come to by themselves. You can read a lot into it, unfortunately, and maybe that's an issue, but
yeah, no, that's really interesting about the relationship between those two questions as well, because there might be some I like what you said about reading things into who people have come with, and in a way I think much more effective to directly say, what made you want to come and see this exhibition today? You know, my friend told me, or I saw it, or, you know, I saw it on Instagram, or I'm a regular gallery visitor. To ask the specific question rather than have information about who they've come with and then make kind of assumptions based on that. Knowing about who they've come with could be useful and important. You know, if it turns out that 70% of people have come in an organised college trip, then that's really, really useful for you to know, again, in terms of how to engage people. And what did you think about this idea of younger visitors? Did you have a shared definition of what a younger visitor is?
I don't know if we didn't discuss that as a group, but for my particular organisation, our idea of younger, we kind of put children and families together, and we do target them quite successfully. But for us, the most difficult age group to reach is the kind of 15 to 24 kind of demographic.
Yeah.
Who are generally going to things under their own steam, as opposed to going as part of a school trip or going with a family group. So it's reaching that demographic that is basically choosing for themselves what they go to and what they don't go to.
Yeah, absolutely. Independent decision making. Great, thank you. Group 2. Group 3, we need to understand the profile of our audience. So quite a general set of objectives for you. Can I have a volunteer from group 3?
I'm happy to suggest something. So we thought ours was quite a sort of quantitative question, and sort of those sort of questions would give you quite a good understanding of who your audience was. So things like maybe a postcode, sort of personal identification such as gender, possible sexual orientation, if people wanted to give that information. And then things like, did they come to see something specific? So we'll often ask, if we're doing it for a particular exhibition, did they come to see this specifically? Who did they come with? How did they hear about it? So all of those things sort of build up an understanding of who is coming. Yeah, so mainly sort of quantitative, we thought. I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in.
Anyone else from group 3 want to chip in?
I think that's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing, just the age group and whether they'd visited before or was the first time. So there seems to be some overlap with groups 1 and 2 really, but to understand who the core audience is before you know if it's a new or a younger audience really. So.
Yeah. So profile again is quite an interesting thing, isn't it? Because geodemographic profile is the kind of standard way of understanding who's coming, which would include postcodes, as you said. Really simple but really valuable information that you can obviously draw a lot of further things from. And are they new or existing audiences? What else in terms of profile? Are there other particular characteristics that you think are particularly useful to know about audiences?
We also hit on the idea that a lot of people don't want to answer specific questions about their their sexual orientation or even how old they are or something. So we would really need to have a kind of box in there to say prefer not to say. Yeah. So you're not making people feel uncomfortable when you're asking them questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think people often don't know why you're asking as well. So sometimes having something at the start or the end, it just gives a bit of a sort of say how useful it is to have this, to know this, and to sort of help us plan forwards and to make sure we are being something for everybody is useful. I think people don't often get that.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. If people know why you're asking it and what you're going to do with the information and what difference it's going to make to you, then to a degree, they're happy to kind of share that with you. But if they think it's just disappearing into some void, or that it's some kind of checkup type thing, then quite rightly, people don't want to share that sort of information. I also think, as much as if it's at all possible, if you can build in some kind of feedback loop of sharing back with visitors what they've told you in surveys, then you're going to get an even greater engagement in the future. If you do an annual visitor survey, for example, and you've got the chance to share 5 things we discovered about our visitors last year, your average age is 32 and a half and you live in East Fife or whatever. If people know that actually you've made use of that data and you've looked at it, then they'll be much more willing to kind of share their views with you in the future. So yeah, definitely. Great. What was visitors' experience like and how could it be improved? Group 4.
Yeah, I don't mind presenting if everyone's okay. So we talked about the quantitative questions being what were the good bits and what were the bad bits, and then more qualitative, you could maybe ask, how would you present this information if it was up to you, or those sort of questions. And then we started talking about sort of the journey that people might have in a museum or gallery, and how we could ask about how they felt welcomed, and then the end of the process and how we might be saying goodbye to people, and that might be the most important thing of retaining or getting visitors to come back again.
Nice. I like that idea of almost segmenting different aspects of the visit and then asking, how was that for you? Was it very good, neutral, not very good, the welcome, the exhibitions, the interpretation, you know, if you've got a cafe or anything, you know, and just giving people the chance to then be a bit more specific in their feedback. I think one of the risks with open questions is people can say quite general stuff and you're not quite exactly sure what they mean. Whereas if you can combine it with something quite precise and then have an open question like, what could we have done better? Then you've got a really nice combination of things. Yeah, fab. Okay, finally, group 5, who were looking at to what degree did artists run exhibition? So this is assuming you're quite a big organization and you've got other things going on at the same time as an artist runs exhibition. You might have, so to what degree was the artist runs show a motivator for people's visit that day? Who would like to share what you came up with?
I'm happy to share and then people can chip in if I miss anything. So we first spoke about the possible wording of the question and keeping it simple. So maybe we wouldn't ask what motivated you, but something like, what was your reason for your visit today, or why did you visit? We discussed.
Ooh, lost your sound, Tom.
Oh, sorry, I'm holding my space bar. I just stopped holding it. We also discussed the option of having multiple options. So the question wouldn't be, was your reason for visiting the Artists exhibition, but what was your reason? And then listing.
Oh, nice.
So was it the permanent collections, if you have them? Was it the Artists exhibition? Was it the shop? Was it the cafe? And then potentially having multiple, you're able to pick multiple in case you had a couple, or grading those options. It was mentioned that it would be helpful to know if people had visited before, and to get a sense whether they come to whichever exhibition is on. So it might have been the Artists exhibition, but that might not actually mean much about this specific exhibition. And then also talking about what's the reason for the question. So if it was for something like program development, that might require a follow-on question about why that exhibition, but only if that was felt like that would get some useful information that would inform future programming.
Great.
So I think that's everything, unless anyone wants to add in.
Lots of detail behind there, absolutely, and getting under the skin of that question. And I really like what you said about just thinking about the wording as well, and using kind of normal everyday language, and maybe not the same kind of language we would have when we're writing, you know, our research schedule, or when we're writing reports of funders, you know, using things like, well, what was the reason for your visit? Or what was it that attracted you to come to the museum today? Absolutely thinking about, yeah, real language and how real people speak. It's always a really great idea, I think, once you've drafted your survey, to test it with somebody who isn't a kind of gallery professional, and just to get their sense of, does this make sense? And is it understandable? And, you know, can you work your way through it? Because again, I think when we're all in a certain world, it's quite easy to kind of slip into jargon sometimes and make assumptions, but testing it with your flatmate or your mum or something can be absolutely really good way of making sure that your survey makes sense to people. Great, thanks everyone for that. Really helpful. I'm going to move back into sharing some slides for the last section, but as we go through this, please do kind of chip in if you've got questions or comments or reflections on each section, and I'll be kind of actively asking you that question as well. Okay, I'm not intending to go through this in any detail, but people often ask me, what's the best survey system to use? And I've just got a really simple table here that lists some of the most common ones. And I'm afraid to say Google Forms is pretty good in terms of its value for money and its flexibility. SurveyMonkey is often the kind of go-to, is the default one, but it's actually really expensive if you want to do anything more basic than just have 10 questions and 40 answers. So, you know, Google Forms, I think, is a really good option. Anyone got any experience themselves of particularly good survey tools that you would recommend that might not be on this list, or anything to say about any of these that you've used and that you've found really helpful?
I've used Microsoft Forms, but I'm still new to it, but I have found it useful because they does lovely summaries and I really like it, but I haven't used other survey tools before, so I can't compare.
Okay, great. But presumably that's completely free as well, is it? Part of the Microsoft package?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So definitely worth checking that out. And of course, what all of these do is they will do the analysis and build the graphs and the charts for you absolutely automatically, and even get into the next, the next level of analysis. So yeah, so you don't need to spend a lot of money on a survey system. There are really good, completely free options out there. So moving on from survey tools, survey methods. Again, I've just got a table here outlining the different survey methods, because there are pros and cons to each of them. And I know it's often a resource question. So what I mean by self-completion surveys, so I'm thinking hard copy pile of surveys on a desk, help yourself type option, which is the sort of easiest option, but can really lead to quite a biased sample and lots of incomplete surveys. So for me, it's the least useful way of doing it. I think the data you're likely to get back is going to be really skewed and not really worth having. The next step up, if you can possibly find the staff resource, is to have what's called assisted self-completion, where you've got volunteers or staff help, approaching people, maybe taking them through the survey, or at least introducing it and being there to kind of help them complete it. Much better chance of getting A, a representative sample across the range of visitors, and B, the chance for a conversation, which is always really valuable. I've done a quick thing about paper and digital as well. Many of you, if you're doing face-to-face surveys, you may well be using iPads or equivalent things, which of course the data goes in automatically and you don't have the hassle of data entry. But sometimes that actually moving through a paper survey can actually be quicker for people than kind of scrolling through a digital one. It really depends. A sort of middle ground, if you haven't got the staff resource to kind of stand in the gallery all the time taking people through a survey, is just asking for email addresses and sending a follow-up e-survey, which can be really effective. And in my experience, you can get really good response rates from that. But the key thing is sending it out as soon as possible after people's visit. Kind of every day after their visit that goes past and they don't get the survey, the lower your response rate. So that's really a good option. Pop-up survey, on your website, or a link through your social channels can be quite good, but again, be really wary of, well, who is seeing this survey and how accurate is it in terms of the range of visitors that we want to hear from. Any top tips to share from anyone in terms of these methods that you've tried?
Just to say on having front of house people assisting with self-completion, it's been helpful from some organisations we've worked with, where those front of house staff have also fed into the feedback. So the conversations they've had with the people around completing surveys, also having some facility to capture that conversation, because sometimes people will say something that's more enlightening than they would put into a survey.
That's a really nice point, Tom. Yeah, those extra bits of anecdotal feedback again can be absolutely invaluable and really rich. And I think if I'll come to you in just a sec, if you are involving kind of staff in doing, self-completion surveys, really, really important that they know what the survey is about and why you're doing it, and they've been engaged as much in the process as possible, so they really kind of understand the importance of doing it. and they feel really kind of briefed and confident and able to talk to people, and it's not just kind of another thing on their to-do list. So kind of briefing and training staff is really important. And some people even offer incentives to people, like who can get the most surveys completed this week, which may or may not fit with different organisations. Yeah, you had a question, I think.
Was it me? Sorry, Gemma.
Was it Gemma or was it?
Oh no, sorry, I was going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it. Anyway, both of you go for it.
Yeah, there you go.
I keep moving to my next slide. Go for it.
I was just going to say we had artist rooms over COVID, and so we actually had to change how we managed the exhibition. So we had our volunteers actually doing the doing a tour of the exhibition. So they actually took people round and then did the questionnaire at the end, and we found that was really good because they actually had a relationship with the visitor, and then it was much easier for them to go through the questionnaire. And actually we had a much more uptake of questionnaires being filled in than previously. So we probably had less visitors over that time, but more questionnaires filled in because they'd actually had that relationship with the visitor first before they went coldly into a questionnaire. So that worked really well.
Lovely, that's really nice. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was just going to add a little follow-on comment from what Tom was saying about gallery assistants and things, because we have, gallery assistants in each of the spaces, and actually what we've found is a kind of handy little thing, which sounds obvious, but it's proving quite useful, is that each gallery assistant has like a little notebook with them all the time. And, we encourage them to just note little things, or just note comments that they get, or things that they observe, or, to actually kind of actively encourage them just to note little anecdotes down throughout each day. And actually those little things can prove incredibly useful. So yeah, it sounds simple, but yeah, we've found that just equipping a gallery assistants with a little notebook and encouraging them to note things that they spot throughout the day or that they hear is a useful little additional thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. And of course, they're your kind of eyes and ears on the gallery floor, seeing how people are behaving, hearing what they're saying, seeing where they're kind of clustering and hearing the conversation. So yeah, brilliant. Great, we'll move on. So my next set of slides are all about how many surveys you need and all of those kind of nuts and bolts. So anyone, and you may have seen, because I've just flashed up the slide twice by accident, but how many surveys do you think you should aim for in an ideal world if you were surveying your kind of visitors for the span of an exhibition? How many surveys would you consider a really good response rate for your gallery? 50, 100, 200? What would be good?
Would we not need to think about the percentage of comparing it to the percentage of our visitors, or because I send out surveys and I probably only get a third of their number back that I sent.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely yeah, half right in terms of that. It really depends on what the total number is. However, there is a kind of useful magic number to aim for, which I'm going to share with you now, but then we'll look at sampling in a bit more detail. Ideally, you want to get about 200 surveys back, which I know might seem a bit daunting. And the way sample size works, unfortunately, isn't a direct relationship. And the mathematical formula behind this, I'm not an expert in, but it's not as simple as saying 5% or 10%, because the kind of curve doesn't work like that, which I'm just about to share with you. So this is a slightly detailed table, but hopefully it's useful in terms of figuring out how many surveys to aim for and what the actual quality of the results from the surveys will be that tell you. So I'm just going to talk you through it and give you a few minutes to look at it, because I'm aware there's a lot of information on there. So population size on the left-hand side, what that means is it's the total group you were interested in. So if you could talk to every single person, how many people would that be? So for example, are you surveying your annual visitors? Are you surveying just the visitors for this particular show? Are you surveying people who are members of your friends scheme? So the population is the whole group that you're actually interested in. And that's the number on the left-hand side. Obviously, in an ideal world, you'd speak to every single one of those people, but we can't really do that. So the sample is the smaller group within that who will actually take part in your survey. So that's the numbers on the next section. And the margin of error is how accurate the findings are. So how happy you are. So it's really a sort of decision about how happy you are in terms of the accuracy of the survey. And you'll see I've detailed what each one means in the copy at the bottom. So a 3% margin of error means the real answer could be 3% higher, or it could be 3% lower. A 5% margin of error means, again, the real answer could be 5% higher or lower, and 10% the same thing. So you'll see that if you're happy with a 10% margin of error, you don't need many surveys at all. But on the other hand, the chance of that being an accurate reflection across your whole population is very slim. You know, it could be kind of total of 20% out in terms of the findings. So in terms of surveys, if you can aim for a 5% margin of error, that's absolutely acceptable. You know, 3% would be amazing, but a 5% margin of error is really acceptable across kind of the research world. Now, has that made sense in terms of that table? So it is quite useful, particularly I think when you're reporting on survey findings, particularly externally, things like the number of survey responses is really quite important to give your findings credibility. So actually knowing this and having an idea of the margin of error is really, really useful. And all of the surveys, most of the survey systems will have a kind of online way of you calculating this as well. So, you know, you might want to keep this table as a reference guide, but equally you could use any survey system you were doing as well. And it will tell you how many surveys to aim for. If you said my total exhibition visitors are 1,000, then it would give you an idea of the number of surveys you want to try and get back. Any questions on sampling sizes? Yeah.
Can I just ask about smaller audiences than that? Actually, I mean, I don't very often work with people that get, but there are sometimes when organisations are sort of very little community organisations, 500 would be quite a big deal for them. They might be aiming for, I don't know, maybe, well, less than that, yeah. Particularly projects, because I often work on projects which involve lots of young people or young people with learning disabilities. So they wouldn't necessarily expect to bring those kind of numbers in. It might be, you know, 80 would be a good audience for them, for that, you know, they'd be aiming at that. And then, so I have used this for really big, you know, like it's brilliant for things like outdoor events, because you don't have to worry. You can sort of say to people that we really don't have to get thousands of surveys. I know there are 45,000 people here, but honestly, we don't need to worry. Yeah, so it's really the smaller audiences, Sarah.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the smaller audiences, in a way, it needs to be an even higher proportion.
Yeah,
the more of those people, the better. It's almost like, can you speak to almost like 80% of them or something to try and just be as rigorous as possible? But you know, it's pragmatic about resources and about the type of audience it is and the sort of data you want, but really as many as possible. So you feel that actually this feels valid and true and accurate, and that you kind of believe that you're speaking to you know, enough of people to have a really true sense of their experience. If that makes sense, yeah. Okay, we'll move on to bias. So a key thing in surveys is to try and avoid kind of any kind of bias in terms of the findings and the method that you're doing. So again, this comes back to, you want to have real confidence that actually the data you've got feels kind of true and accurate and reflective of the people that you wanted to speak to. So be aware of things like leading questions, trying to have wording of questions that's kind of neutral rather than suggestive. You know, how friendly were the gallery assistants is quite leading, whereas something a more one, you know, asking to people to kind of, you know, judge. That's probably a bad example, but anyway, you know what I mean. Try not to have leading questions that suggest a kind of good response in the answers. The sample we've already looked at ideally should reflect the whole population, not particular just groups within it. And the method you use, again, is really crucial in terms of making sure everyone has an equal chance to be involved in the survey. So for example, only doing an e-survey that, you know, only goes out to your members will be great, but it would only tell you the story of your members. Or only surveying on a Saturday or at weekends will be a fantastic way of getting a picture of weekend visitors, but it will miss everyone else who comes Monday to Friday. So in terms of the methods and the sample, it's really important to try and look across like the range of the different types of people who come, to be really sure that everyone kind of has an equal chance of being in the survey. And kind of humanness comes into that as well, particularly if you're using assisted self-completion. It can be quite easy for gallery staff to be a bit, it's human nature to maybe kind of only ask the people who look kind of smiley to fill in the survey and ignore certain groups, or to only ask people who look a bit like the sort of people you are. So when you're training any gallery assistants to do surveying, really important to kind of be really clear about saying, okay, actually, we want you to ask every second person who comes through the door. Doesn't matter who they are, ask every second person. And then, you know, we've got a really kind of random sense. And of course, somebody might say, no, I don't want to do the survey. That's okay. So then you ask the next second person. So that kind of human bias is really important as well, to try and get rid of that if you can. And then finally, of course, in how you analyze your data, again, try and be as neutral as possible. It's very easy for us to sort of have hypotheses that we're hoping to kind of prove in our data, and to pull out the things that actually tell us what we wanted to know, but maybe ignore the things that actually aren't quite so positive. So trying to be really balanced in how you analyze and report on the data is really, really important. So you've done your surveys, you've devised the right questions, you've got your fantastic gallery team being really proactive in terms of getting data in, you've analysed it through your survey system. And now, this is the point of analysing it. So just some points to bear in mind in terms of analysis of the data. Again, comes back to your objectives. If your questions have been driven by your objectives, your analysis should have a nice logical flow to it, because it will be following the questions you set yourself at the beginning. All the survey systems have built-in analysis. You don't need to be some kind of Excel whiz anymore to kind of do survey analysis. It will do it all for you at the push of a button. In my experience, it's always really useful in terms of doing analysis to have some kind of comparison or context in your mind to give the data some meaning. Do you remember right at the beginning of the session, I said 80% of our visitors had never been before? Like by itself, that's an interesting stat, but is that good? Is that bad? how does that compare to the previous exhibition? Or is that what we expected? So the more you can bring context to any findings, the more useful it is. You know, is that higher or lower than what you expected? Is that higher or lower than the same time last year or the last time we showed this artist? It just gives any of your findings much more kind of meaning if you can bring that kind of context. Is anyone part of any kind of benchmarking group of other galleries where you compare what's going on with your visitors to others, maybe in your area or even nationally, as part of any benchmarking groups? Does anyone do any of that? No. Okay. Because that can be really valuable, that sense of you might have a really clear understanding of your own visitors, but actually how that compares to visitors in other places, maybe with similar exhibition profiles to yourself or with similar population profiles, can really give you a sense of where you might be doing really well or where you could kind of learn from each other. So benchmarking can be a really valuable thing, I think. If you get the chance to benchmark what's going on in your place with other places, really, really valuable. Hypotheses and expectations, again, important to have those in your mind, but not be completely obsessed by them. Surprises or confirmations. And the final 2 points I've got on this slide, just really about that extra level of analysis, which again, your survey systems will do for you, but can be really useful to go a bit deeper into your data. So for example, to just look at certain sections of your audience, you know, just a certain age group or just new visitors, for example, and you can compare responses to different groups. So for example, say you were interested in the quality of the visit, you might be really interested to know, well, are first-time visitors having the same kind of high quality experience as regular visitors? So doing a cross tab and looking at the responses for those two different groups could give you some really useful information. So thinking about how experiences might be different for different groups of visitors, really, really useful. Anyone want to add anything about analysis from their experience of any top tips? Okay, we'll go on. Sorry, somebody had a point. Yeah, who was it?
Oh, am I there? Hiya. Yeah, no, I was it's also seems to be what I've done a lot of is doing that analysis, but getting it back out there to the people. So being able to present it in a way that people really get what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, trying to make it really clear what brilliant. Which leads me brilliantly on to the final couple of slides, which are about kind of sharing that data. Just briefly, two potential ways to share your data internally. I would hope that everyone has the chance to have kind of regular wash-ups after exhibitions to look at what went well, what didn't go so well, what did we learn, things like that. If you're making the effort to do research, it's just heartbreaking when nothing happens with it and it just sits in a drawer or it sits on your desk and nobody else gets to see it. So, you know, if you're going to do this research, please do kind of use it and share it with colleagues and make kind of value from it. And again, thinking externally about, well, thinking of funders and other partners, which aspects of what you found would they find useful and interesting? Or do you actually have to report to them based on your kind of funding, whatever? And think really carefully about ways of sharing the data. As that person just said, you know, coming up with ways of sharing it that really make it easy for people to get the story from the data is really, really important. So yeah, not loads and loads of tables of kind of percentages and things like that, but charts and graphs. I'm just going to finish with a couple of examples of some visual ways of doing data, none of which are like radically infographic-tastic. They're all just basic kind of charts and graphs, but I hope they kind of give a sense of what's going on really simply. So keep it simple and make it visual. These are all things that I've used. The top left is just a map of a particular borough in London, and we captured postcodes of people that had been involved in the project. And so you can really immediately see, gosh, most people came from within the borough boundary. So that's immediately, for stakeholders, that's a really, you know, for the local authority, that's a really nice, simple, quick way of showing the local engagement. And I just drew the borough boundary like in Google Maps. And as you can tell today, I am not a technical wizard, but I could do something like this just in Google Maps. So it's really straightforward. 3 words is always a nice thing to ask people. What 3 words, you know, would you use to describe your experience today or this exhibition? And word clouds, again, can capture the kind of themes and meanings behind those kind of questions. It's a really simple word cloud about a creatives network that I was evaluating a while ago. Light bulbs, for some reason, the designer thought light bulbs would be a good way of graphically showing a 72% result in a piece of publicity that I was involved in doing. So these are the answers to a matrix rating question. You know, those sorts of questions where you have different answer options and you say whether you agree, strongly agree, whatever. And again, it really clearly shows you, if you were sharing this with a colleague, for example, I'm hoping it'd be quite simple to say, look, here's the workshop feedback. If we look at it, we can see actually that we're doing really well on enjoyable, and people are having a great time at the workshops. They're really having fun, but looking at it, the level of connection with other people isn't going so well. You can see that's not scoring so highly. So it gives you immediately a kind of picture of what's going well and what's not going well and what you need to work on. And I'm sure you're sharing data like this already. This is, I'm sure, nothing radically new. And just finally a couple of artist rooms charts to show you in terms of, you know, I was talking about benchmarks in context at the bottom. So this chart at the bottom is showing the artist room's audience profile age compared to a benchmark that the audience agency did across a whole load of galleries. So you can see where you can compare. So that was an absolute whistle-stop tour through those final slides, for which I apologise. It's 4 o'clock and I know we're going to finish at 4. But if anyone does have any kind of final questions, things we haven't covered, or stuff that you would like follow up on, do shout.
Just to say that was incredibly reassuring, Sarah, and I really like it that it's low tech and it kind of really feeds into our sort of us using our skills, you know, that we have in doing the jobs that we're doing to feel that we can get on and do these things, that we don't have to be special sort of wizards. And I mean, although people asked me to come in as an independent evaluator, I often spend quite a lot of time reassuring them that actually they're doing fine and that they don't need enormous metrics and, you know, great systems to do it. So I feel very reassured that I'm able to go back to people and I mean and feel comfortable about what I'm saying. So for me, this session has been a bit of a benchmarking session, in fact, and a bit of sense checking as well. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I think that's a really key point for everyone, actually. You know, it's actually logic and common sense. Most kind of evaluation is just taking a kind of logical, thoughtful approach, bringing in a number of perspectives and just trying to really think through what you're doing and what difference you want to make and how you're going to measure it. You don't need to be you know, have a PhD in social sciences. You just need to have some good tools and think about it in the right way. Great. Anyone else? Any other questions that I haven't answered? Okay. Thanks everyone for sticking through until 4 o'clock, and apologies again about the rather the technical hitches. I'm going to follow up with the slides and some signposting to creative methods and some signposting to story of change. And I'll put my email in there as well. And if there's anything that you would like to ask following up, then please do. And finally, of course, it being a webinar on evaluation, we really need to know about what we could do better in the future, what was most useful, what was missing. And so please do be honest and constructive in your feedback, because it's really valuable for the Artist Rooms teams. As Fiona said, this is the first of the series, so it's really great to get your feedback on kind of what's really important going forward. So please do fill in the survey. No prizes, no prizes though, I don't think.
I will send it round as well to everyone as well straight after this. So yeah, we'd really appreciate your feedback. And thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you everyone for all of your contributions. It was really lovely to meet you all. Thank you.